The moment Isabelle Fontaine set down the tray of Cappies and felt a hand close around her wrist, she didn't scream, she didn't pull away. She just looked at the woman in front of her, pearls perfume, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and waited. "Where is it?" Vivienne Hargrove said, quiet enough that no one else in the ballroom could hear. "The bracelet. Where did you put it?" Isabelle said nothing. That was the thing about Vivienne Hargrove. She had spent 30 years learning how to say terrible things in a register that sounded almost polite. Almost. And she had spent those same 30 years assuming that people like Isabelle, people who carried trays and refilled glasses and disappeared into service corridors, had no recourse, no leverage, no voice that anyone would listen to. She was wrong. The Hargrove estate sat on 40 acres of Laurentian lakefront property, about 2 hours north of Montreal. The kind of place where the driveway alone was longer than most city blocks, and the main house had a name, Maison Vérité, House of Truth, which was either deeply ironic or deeply oblivious, depending on who you asked. The gardens were manicured into submission. The dock stretched out over water, so still it looked painted. Isabelle had driven up that driveway for the first time 8 months ago, in a car with one working window and a check engine light that had been on so long she'd stopped seeing it. She was 29. She had a culinary certificate from a community college in Gatineau, 3 years of experience in hotel catering, and a letter of recommendation from her supervisor at the Chateau Laurier that she'd read so many times the fold lines had gone soft. She needed the job. That was the simple truth of it. Vivienne Hargrove needed a private chef for the estate. Not a cook, she'd been very specific about that in the listing, the kind of specific that told you a great deal about the person doing the hiring. A chef. Someone who could handle dietary requirements for her husband's business guests, manage a household menu across dietary restrictions and social occasions, and do it all with what the posting called discretion and professionalism. The salary listed made Isabelle's eyes go strange for a moment when she read it. She applied the same afternoon. The interview had been conducted by Hargrove himself. Edouard Hargrove, 63, founder of a property development firm that had built half the condominiums in the eastern townships. He was a large man, soft around the edges in the way that old money eventually softens everything. And he'd been kind in a distracted way. He'd asked her about her training. He'd asked whether she was comfortable with classical French technique. He'd told her the kitchen was new, fully equipped, and that she'd have full autonomy over the menus as long as guests were happy. He did not mention his wife. Vivienne Hargrove introduced herself on Isabelle's third day, appearing in the kitchen doorway at 9 in the morning in silk and full makeup, looking at Isabelle the way someone looks at a new appliance, assessing, briefly, whether it would do. "You're younger than I expected," Vivienne said. "I'll try not to let that affect the food," Isabelle said. There was a pause. Vivienne smiled very slightly in a way that did not mean she was amused. "My husband likes you already," she said. "He mentioned you made him eggs this morning. He came in early, he seemed hungry. He's not supposed to have eggs. Cholesterol. He told me his doctor cleared him for 2 a week. I made one." Another pause. Vivienne looked at the mise en place Isabelle had arranged for the evening's dinner prep. She looked at it the way she looked at everything, as though she was deciding whether it deserved to exist. "Fine," she said, and left. That was how it started. Not with cruelty, exactly, with calibration. Vivienne was testing the edges of things, the way you press a bruise to see how much it hurts. She would appear at unexpected moments. She would change the menu an hour before service. She would inform Isabelle, with great courtesy, that a dish had not been to her liking, even when every guest had asked for the recipe. Isabelle cooked, she adapted, she made note of things and said nothing. There were other staff. A groundskeeper named Patrice, who was 60 and had worked the estate for 20 years and communicated primarily through sighs. A housekeeper, Annette, who moved through the house like a shadow and had eyes like a camera, taking in everything. 2 seasonal workers who came for the garden in summer. They were all, Isabelle gradually understood, operating under the same quiet calculus she was. Do your job well, stay out of her way, keep your head down. "How long have you been here?" Isabelle asked Annette once, near the end of her 2nd month. "Long enough," Annette said. "Is she always like this?" Annette considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "She's worse when Edouard is away," she said finally, "and better when there are guests. She performs well for an audience." Isabelle filed that away. Edward Hargrove was away a great deal. Board meetings in Toronto, site visits in Vancouver, a development project in Halifax that seemed to require his presence every other week. When he was gone, the house contracted around Vivienne, who filled it differently than he did. Where he moved through it loosely, she controlled it tightly, redistributing the air. It was during one of his absences that the bracelet appeared for the first time. Vivienne wore it to dinner alone one Tuesday evening, which Isabelle thought was strange. It was a piece for an occasion, a diamond tennis bracelet that caught the light in a way that seemed almost aggressive for a meal eaten in solitude. But she wore it, and she touched it several times during the meal, the way people touch something they want someone to notice. Isabelle noticed and said nothing, and cleared the plates. The bracelet disappeared 2 days later. She found out the way she found out most things in that house, through Annette. "She's saying something was taken," Annette said, in the kitchen very quietly with her eyes on the doorway. "The bracelet, the one she's been wearing." Isabelle set down the knife she was holding, carefully. "When?" "She says sometime in the last 2 days. She had it Tuesday evening. Wednesday morning it was gone from the vanity." "Have you seen it?" Annette gave her a look. "No, and I've looked everywhere she could have put it, because she does put things places and forget. I looked. It's not there." "So it's lost." "She's not saying lost," Annette said, and the way she said it told Isabelle everything. She came for Isabelle that evening. Not in the kitchen, in the front hallway, where Annette was nearby and Patrice was outside, and there was no one to witness except the oil paintings of people who had been dead for 100 years. Vivienne appeared at the top of the staircase in a black dress, and she descended it with the kind of deliberate unhurriedness that meant she had thought about this, planned it, prepared. "I need to speak to you," she said. "Of course," Isabelle said. "The bracelet, the Cartier. It was in my dressing room on Tuesday evening, and now it is not." "I'm sorry to hear that. I haven't been in your dressing room." "Staff are permitted in certain areas for cleaning." "I'm the chef," Isabelle said. "My work is in the kitchen, the dining room, and occasionally the pantry. I haven't been on the second floor." Vivienne's expression didn't change, which was its own kind of expression. "You were alone in the house yesterday afternoon, from 1 until 4. "I was in the kitchen preparing for this week's menus. Annette was here too. She was cleaning the library." "Annette's schedule is not your concern." "I'm just noting I wasn't alone." The silence stretched. Vivienne looked at her with something that wasn't quite contempt. It was more considered than that, more surgical. "I'm not making an accusation," she said. "I'm simply noting that the bracelet is gone and asking whether you know anything about it." "I don't," Isabelle said. "I'm sorry. I hope it turns up." She held Vivienne's gaze for 3 full seconds, then excused herself and went back to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a long moment with her hands flat on the cool surface, breathing steadily. She had expected something like this, not this, exactly, but something. What Vivienne Hargrove did not know about Isabelle Fontaine. What no one at Maison Vérité knew, because Isabelle had not mentioned it, because it had not come up, because she had long since learned that some information was better kept close. Was that before culinary school, before the Chateau Laurier, before the years of catering and event work and carrying other people's food to other people's tables, Isabelle had spent 4 years with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Not as an officer. She'd left before completing the training, for reasons she kept private. But she had completed enough of it, enough to know how investigations worked, how evidence was gathered, how people behaved when they were lying versus when they were afraid, how accusations were constructed and how they fell apart. She understood procedurally how a thing like this unfolded. She understood the sequence. She also understood that when someone like Vivienne Hargrove decided someone like Isabelle had stolen something, the game was already tilted. Money talked, position talked, and a chef without a powerful last name talked very, very quietly. So she did not panic. She did not get emotional, she thought. She thought about the bracelet and where it was and why Vivienne had chosen now. Edouard had been away for 8 days. He was due back in 4. Vivienne had worn the bracelet to dinner alone. An audience of one, which was unusual for a piece like that, and the bracelet had disappeared not from a locked safe but from an open vanity. She thought about the house's security system, which Edouard had mentioned offhandedly in her 3rd week. A camera on the front gate, cameras on the exterior, a camera in the main hallway for insurance purposes. He'd mentioned it with the casual pride of someone who has spent money on something and wants it noted. She thought about the fact that Annette had worked this house for 11 years and had told her, once, that things went missing periodically. Small things. Things that turned up eventually, in places they shouldn't have been. Isabelle went back to work. She made dinner. She was professional and pleasant, and she paid attention. 3 days later, Edouard came home. The accusation came at dinner. She heard it from the kitchen, raised voices, Vivienne's controlled and deliberate, Edouard's confused and then concerned. She had been plating the first course. She set down the spoon and stood still and listened, and understood exactly what was being said. She came out of the kitchen before she was called. Edouard was standing in the dining room doorway, and his face was the face of a man who is trying to hold two things at once and finding them heavy. Vivienne was at the table, straight-backed, with the expression she wore when she had decided something. Isabelle, Edouard said, and then he stopped because he didn't know how to continue. She's told you about the bracelet, Isabelle said. Yes. I didn't take it. I know you. He stopped again. I want to believe that. You don't have to believe it, Isabelle said. You just have to look at the hallway camera footage from Tuesday night to Friday morning. Silence. Vivienne did not move, but something moved behind her eyes. The security footage, Isabelle continued quietly, covers the main staircase and the hallway leading to the second floor. If I went up there, it will show it. If I didn't, it will show that too. Edouard turned to look at his wife. Vivienne, he said, has that footage been pulled? I don't see why that's necessary, Vivienne said. The girl had access to the house. The footage, Edouard said in a different voice. Has it been pulled? It had not been pulled. It was pulled the following morning, by a security technician Edouard called himself. Isabelle was not present for the viewing. She was in the kitchen, making breakfast, and she was very calm, because she already knew what it would show. It showed Isabelle Fontaine entering the kitchen at 7:15 on Wednesday morning, and not leaving it until 11:45. It showed her in the garden briefly at noon. It showed her returning to the kitchen. It showed her leaving the house at 4:30 and returning at 6. It showed, at 11:03 on Wednesday morning, Vivienne Hargrove descending the staircase with something bright on her wrist. It showed, at 11:47, while Isabelle was still in the kitchen, Vivienne ascending the staircase without it. What followed was not simple. Nothing like this ever is, even when the evidence is clear. Edouard asked Vivienne about it. Privately first, then less privately, then in a conversation that Isabelle was aware of only through the fact that the house went very still for about 40 minutes, and then Patrice quietly suggested she might want to take her lunch break outside. She went outside. She sat on the dock and watched the lake and thought about what came next. What came next, it turned out, was Annette appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee and sitting down without being asked. He's talking to a lawyer, Annette said. Isabelle looked at the water. She's done this before, Annette said quietly. Not exactly this, but close. There was a woman, a housekeeper, before me, 2 years ago. Something went missing. She was let go. What happened to her? She found other work, eventually. But it took time, and Annette paused. There was a period where she couldn't get a reference. Isabelle absorbed this. She knew about the camera, Isabelle said. It wasn't a question. She knew about the front gate camera, Annette said. She may not have known about the hallway one. Mr. Hargrove had it installed 18 months ago. She doesn't always pay attention to what he does with the house. Isabelle looked at her. You knew. I suspected, Annette said carefully. I didn't know you'd know to ask for the footage. Why did she do it? Annette was quiet for a moment. The lake made small sounds against the dock. I think, she said, that when someone has had power for a very long time and they start to feel it slipping, they reach for the tools they've always used. She's done it to keep people afraid, keep them manageable. She wrapped both hands around her cup. You weren't afraid enough, I think. That bothered her. Isabelle thought about this for a long time. She thought about the job listing she had answered 8 months ago, and the drive up that driveway, and the kitchen that was twice the size of her apartment. She thought about the woman who had lost her reference, who had spent months trying to recover something that should never have been taken. She thought about all the people who couldn't ask for footage, who didn't know to ask, who didn't know the footage existed, who had no recourse at all. She wasn't angry. She was something colder and more purposeful than angry. Edward Hargrove issued a formal statement through his lawyer 3 weeks later. Vivienne Hargrove had misrepresented the circumstances surrounding the disappearance of personal property. An internal review, combined with security footage, had exonerated all household staff. Steps were being taken. Steps, the word did a lot of work in that sentence. Vivienne was not criminally charged at first. That came later, and it came because Isabelle, very quietly, through channels she had to look up and relearn, filed a formal complaint with the Sûreté du Québec. Not for the bracelet, for the accusation. For what she could demonstrate was a deliberate and false allegation made to an employer with the intent to cause professional harm. It took 5 months. During those 5 months, Isabelle found other work. She was not without options, it turned out, when she chose to use her network, and she lived in her apartment in Gatineau and cooked for herself and went to bed at a reasonable hour and did not think about Maison Vérité more than was necessary. When the proceeding finally concluded, Vivienne Hargrove was found to have made a knowingly false report. The fine was substantial. The civil suit Isabelle's lawyer filed on her behalf for wrongful termination and reputational damage was settled out of court for an amount that Isabelle did not disclose to anyone except her mother. Edward Hargrove filed for divorce 4 months after the security footage was reviewed. Annette stayed on, she told Isabelle in a message, because the estate was now being managed differently. Patrice had retired. The house had a new name, she said, in the way she said most things, with dry precision and without editorializing. Isabelle wrote back and asked what the new name was. Annette replied, "He took down the sign, it's just a house now." There's something that gets lost in stories like this, something that the tidy resolution tends to obscure. The bracelet was never about the bracelet. It was about what Vivienne Hargrove had always understood to be her right. The right to define what was true in her house, to decide who was credible and who wasn't, to move people around like pieces on a board and face no consequence for it. She had done it before. She would have done it again. She was not a monster in the spectacular sense. She was something more ordinary and in some ways more dangerous. She was a person who had spent decades learning that her version of events was the one that mattered, and she had never once been seriously challenged on it. Until she was. Isabelle Fontaine did not set out to bring her down. She set out to do her job and to protect herself and to refuse to be moved. She was young and she had come from nothing, and she had worked for everything she had, and she was not willing to let one woman's sense of entitlement rewrite the story of who she was. The law is imperfect. Anyone who's had to use it knows that. It is slow and expensive, and it asks a great deal of people who can least afford to give it. Isabelle was lucky. She knew that, said it plainly when asked. She knew how to file paperwork. She knew what questions to ask. She had just enough knowledge of how these systems work to find the doors. Not everyone does. Every person who was ever quietly let go, who lost a reference, who spent months trying to recover something that was taken from them without trial, they deserved what Isabelle got. The record corrected, the compensation paid, the acknowledgement, however formal and impersonal, that what happened to them was wrong. Some of them got it, most of them didn't. That's the part that stays with you long after the case is closed, and the settlement is signed, and the house on the lake has taken down its sign, not the victory, the math of who gets one. Isabelle Fontaine got hers. She has not forgotten that she was lucky. She has not forgotten what it felt like to stand in that hallway and hold a woman's gaze and tell the truth in a house that had been built to bury it. She cooks still. She runs a small catering company now in Gatineau with one part-time employee and a van and a website her cousin built her for free. The food is good. The clients come back. She does not work for people like Vivienne Hargrove anymore. She knows the signs, now, not because they're subtle, but because she finally knows she doesn't have to ignore them. Some lessons cost more than they should. This one cost her 8 months and a legal fight and more sleepless nights than she'll ever say out loud. She'll tell you it was worth it. I keep thinking about that hallway, the oil paintings, the way Vivienne descended those stairs like she had already decided how the story ended. She wasn't wrong that she had power. She had a great deal of it, the kind that comes from decades of no one pushing back. What she miscalculated was the person standing at the bottom of the stairs. Isabelle wasn't afraid of her, not because she was reckless, but because she had done the work, quietly and without anyone watching, of knowing exactly what the truth was and exactly how to prove it. That's the thing I come back to most. Isabelle didn't win because she got lucky or because the system worked the way it should. She won because she had thought clearly in a moment that was designed to make her stop thinking. When Vivienne came down those stairs with her pearls and her certainty, the expected response was fear, the flinch, the scramble, the desperate over-explanation. Instead, Isabelle said, "Look at the footage." 4 words, calm, precise, and devastating. That kind of clarity doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from years of doing honest work and knowing the difference between what you can control and what you can't. Isabelle couldn't control what Vivienne said about her. She couldn't control who believed it in the first hour. What she could control was whether she had acted with integrity every single day she was in that house, and she had. That was the foundation. When everything else was being questioned, she had something solid to stand on. I think about the woman who came before her. The housekeeper who was quietly let go 2 years earlier, who lost her reference, who spent months trying to recover something that had been taken from her without a trial, or a hearing, or even a formal accusation. She didn't have what Isabelle had. Not the procedural knowledge, not the awareness of the camera, not the language to navigate what came next. And that's not a personal failing. That's a structural one. The system is built in ways that make it easier to survive if you already know how it works. What strikes me about Isabelle is that she didn't keep that knowledge to herself. She filed the complaint not just to clear her name, but to create a record, to make it harder for the next person to be dismissed without consequence. That's a different kind of courage than the dramatic kind. It's the slow, unglamorous paperwork kind, the kind that requires you to show up repeatedly over 5 months when you'd rather just move on. Vivienne thought she was dealing with someone who could be managed. Someone whose version of events could be quietly buried under money and position, and the assumption that the word of someone like her would always outweigh the word of someone like Isabelle. She wasn't wrong that those assumptions exist. She was wrong that they were enough. What you choose to do when you're treated as though your truth doesn't matter, that's where character actually lives. Not in the moments when things are easy. In the moments when someone is standing in front of you, pearls and champagne, telling you who you are, and you know, with complete certainty, that they're mistaken. Isabelle knew. She stayed steady, and she let the evidence speak for itself. That's not a small thing, that's everything.